Won't you ask me to dance?
This is called The Psychiatrist, the show where psychiatrists answer your questions. I'm Dr. David Handley.
And I'm Dr. Abby Snavely.
Say you like me, you better count the way.
On this episode, we have two listener questions. Alice and her husband see the same therapist individually and as a couple. The therapist told Alice's husband that they should get a divorce. A 17-year-old listener feels like there are things he can't tell his therapist after she disclosed her religious identity. Listening to this podcast does not mean we have a doctor-patient relationship. Our intention is to educate and entertain you. Nothing we say is intended or recommended as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your own physician or other qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical questions or conditions. This first question comes from Alice.
My husband and I see the same therapist for individual counseling and couples therapy. He has been going for far longer than I have. As a point of reference, I'm close to finishing my first year of therapy. On several occasions, my husband has said something along the lines of, "My therapist told me to leave you, but I still stay because I love you," or "She doesn't like you." Part of me understands where the therapist is coming from. I was extremely toxic at the beginning of our marriage and have been working on it for the past year. However, I don't want to see this therapist anymore. I feel bad because this really isn't the therapist's fault. I know I've been toxic, but it just hurts thinking that for the entire year, they've been thinking I'm a miserable person. I'm not going to do any more counseling on my own with her. But the tricky part is, I don't want to see her for couples therapy either. How can I tell my husband this?
You know, in some ways, I think this question is easier than some that we answer because I think there's actually a very clear answer to this one.
Right. Good. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's how do I tell him, but it sounds like the question asker and us are all on the same page that she should not be in therapy with this lady anymore.
Yeah, right.
I mean, okay, like that part's answered.
Right. We can get into some more details, but before we even talk about what's going on in the three-way relationship, we're being asked to assume something as true that the therapist actually said this to the husband. And,
right.
And the reason I question it is because of how manipulative this is. It's very junior high school. My friend says I should leave you, but I love you too much. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There's no way to know if he's just splitting here, like trying to pit the therapist and the wife against each other.
Right.
But, Alice is owning being toxic, which, I mean, that's important to
whatever
acknowledge
that means, but sure.
Well, yeah, but at least she's acknowledging some mistakes in the relationship.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Fair.
It would be unusual, though, that the other person in the partnership were perfect.
Right.
That she gets all the blame. And so there's this part of me that would like to make sure that Alice's reality hasn't been skewed by her husband. Her husband's been going to this therapist for years, so he set a lot of groundwork before Alice showed up. And I don't know, something smells a little off here. It might not be anything, but maybe Alice needs to think about whether this guy is playing some games.
I mean, I think that it is important to realize that, yes, that we're being asked to assume something, and I'm right there with you. But I also think that, like, either way, either the therapist really says this and the husband continues to see the therapist and discloses it to Alice, or he made it up and says it. But either way, saying it to her, right? Like, we're not problem free in the realm of this husband. Even though I know the question is maybe allegedly more about the therapist and Alice, but there either way there's a problem. Either way, he's being manipulative. I think I have other reasons to think that the therapist is problematic, whether she actually said those things or not. But yeah, it's still, there's something's fishy.
This scenario that's been presented by Alice is actually one of the reasons that it is a best practice for therapists not to get into these kind of three-way relationships.
Absolutely. What a mess. This is what happens when you break this rule, or this is what could happen. Right? I mean, I know. And actually I would love to hear of people of all different disciplines. I know that there may be, marriage and family therapists or other people who were trained within their discipline, that it's fine to have both people as individual clients as well as the couple as a client. But, what I was always taught in couples therapy is that you have to put the relationship first, right? That to the best of your ability, you're supposed to remain neutral, or at least, support both partners in as much as it supports the couple. And so, I was taught that whenever you could avoid it, you absolutely should not have anybody, I guess, as an individual client, let alone one person while you're treating the couple.
I've never been in quite the situation that they are in, but I have definitely, I've bent the rule, or I have accommodated request before.
Sure.
Like, for example, I've had a spouse, like at the urging of the patient, I've had a spouse join us maybe for like 6 to 8 sessions. I don't see the individual. I don't see my patient anymore for that time
you can
period.
Transition. Yeah.
Well, and it's, and there's the other thing though is we talk a lot about this, that we talk about a lot of the potential consequences and, how somebody's going to think that I'm taking sides, even if I'm just trying to interpret what's in front of me. And what happens, is that so your patient, if they think you've taken their spouse's side, then they're hurt. If the spouse thinks you've taken your patient's side, they feel ganged up on, or they just dismiss all your feedback because you're not being fair. And
to be clear, people are going to have those kinds of reactions in couples work anyway, even if there's not, another relationship that they're not privy to all the details of.
And I think that's where so much imbalance comes from, is because, the therapist knows so much more about Alice that Alice doesn't even know that she knows, because she probably didn't share the specifics, or at least even if the content is the same, all that information was first filtered through her husband's view of things. And unless they're talking about all of these potential consequences, it's just, this is bound to happen.
Right.
And I'll say when I have done this, and it's been circumstantial. I mean, because of a lot of external factors of where I live, like referrals are really tough and there's not a lot of availability. But even in that setting, I'm always checking in. I'm always trying to prevent a triangulation like that. I'm always trying to make sure that, and also make sure that everybody knows that it's not best practice. Like, we can do this, we can see how it goes, but ideally you're working on a referral and you're going to get set up with a third party or another party.
Yes, I have so many questions. And it's like, so in the couples therapy, are they trying to get divorced? Are they trying to stay together? Because if the therapist is approaching the couple like she's trying to help them get along and stay together, and then, in secret or behind closed doors with the husband, she's telling him to get a divorce, like, that is seriously messed up.
Well,
right? Like, you cannot gaslight these people or give contrary information, right? I mean, like, this is wild. Or
that was my answer to Alice when she says, "How do I tell my husband?" It's like, well, that's what you say. Is like, well, apparently our therapist thinks we need to get a divorce. We can't get better, but yet we're saying that our intended goal is to make this marriage work for us. So how could we possibly see her? Our goals are not aligned.
She might be on your side sometimes, but like, she's definitely not on our side, not on the couple's side.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
So that means I wonder if the husband just uses the threat of divorce then to keep her in line.
Well, like I said, the husband has as many red flags as the therapist. Sorry, Alice. I mean, woof, it is tricky. Yes, indeed. Anyway, go on.
Well, so Alice has already decided she's not going back. I did wonder.
I applaud. I'm full support of that.
What if she goes back one more time to confront the therapist just to see if the husband is splitting? Because I think whether she sees the therapist again, whether she sees her with the husband, I think the husband is going to continue seeing this person. And so maybe this is feedback that would be important, if he really is just splitting, or if he's manufactured it all.
Okay, maybe. I hear you. But I have a couple thoughts about that. Yeah, she could go back, right, and try to see if the husband's splitting. I guess she could confront the therapist and say, "Did you really say this to my husband?" Right? Or, "He says you said this." I might be tempted to say, like, just so you know, this is the kind of thing he's saying. But this is the part too where, like, I actually don't even understand what the rules are in this sort of triangulated situation, because, I mean, is the therapist at liberty to disclose everything from her and the husband's sessions to Alice, right? Like, which things is she keeping secret? Which is she, or not secret, but private, I should say, versus what's being said? This is also why it's messy, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't know how you would handle that, but a lot of times if somebody is my primary patient, even if the spouse comes in for some sessions or the spouse emails me or reaches out to me, the understanding is that the primary patient gets access to all of the information. Like, I'm not going to have any contacts or disclosures or conversations that you at least don't know about, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, preferably the spouse would always be in the room, but it's like, if I talked to their spouse, I'm going to give a summary of what we said.
Mhm.
But I don't know where the therapist lady's loyalties lie. And if she is really on the husband's side, I guess I don't trust this woman. Like, she could lie. She could say she can't disclose the information from their sessions. I don't know.
What if they go back as a couple then? And this becomes so maybe Alice doesn't go back individually, but they go as a couple so they can be discussing it out in the open.
That's how you burn it down, man. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's your advice, back. Alice. Go back one more time
and
get to the bottom of this.
Said this.
Yeah.
Well, and then, to your idea, I can imagine that he is going to want to keep going to this therapist. But if I was Alice, I would have a really hard time trusting this therapist, which, she doesn't have to trust her husband's therapist. But like, knowing this woman and how kind of loosey-goosey her boundaries are, at least from a certain standpoint, and having, your spouse see a therapist who allegedly, or it is confirmed that they think you should get divorced, like, that's a pretty tough way to move forward. And so I guess part of it, which isn't her question, is I want to know from the husband, like, does he want to stay together? Does he want to work on his own stuff? Is he trying to avoid a divorce? And if he does, then I don't think this is the therapist for him in any context after all this time.
Yeah, right. Back to the idea that their goals aren't aligned. So why are you doing this?
Right.
You're not going to, if that really is your goal, then this isn't the person to help you through that.
And if he just wants people to be like, yeah, your wife sucks, like, he should probably get some friends, right? I mean, like, he could probably rope them into that. I don't know, if you just need somebody to bash your partner with you, like, lots of people do that for free for the cost of a beer.
That's right. All right. Like I said, it's real straightforward. I hope that helps, Alice.
Alice, good luck. I'd love to get some follow-up. I would like to be a fly on the wall when you quote these quotes in front of them both and see what happens.
Yeah. And don't let them make you the bad guy. I don't know.
That's what I mean. And you can take responsibility for your actions, but, if you're working on it and hopefully you find somebody new to help you work on it, then yeah, I guess that's the other part, is like, you need to be given an opportunity to grow and change and improve. And if it's really about the past and you have, there's no kind of grace given for you to be different in the future, then I think the relationship's not going to work. Good luck, Alice.
Dancing just you and me. Cha-cha-cha.
So this question was sent in by somebody who's under 18. He shared his name, but he's a minor, so we're going to change his name, call him Jack. I am 17 years old and have been seeing a therapist for about 6 months for anxiety and depression. My therapist has been helpful until recently when we were talking about religion. She let me know she's a devout Christian. It's ruined everything. I wanted to talk about my interest in sex, my curiosity about being attracted to men and women, and other non-Christian things. I'm afraid to say anything because I feel like she will judge me. How do I handle this? I don't want to start over with someone new, but I don't feel comfortable where I'm at. When I first read this, I was kind of irritated on Jack's behalf. I felt very protective. Probably
only kind of.
He's young, right?
He is young. No, I'm saying I'm very irritated.
He seems very emotionally mature, though, I wanted to say.
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, he's going to therapy as a teenager, which is a big step, right? He is open to talking about all sorts of things that might be hard for anyone to talk about with a stranger, right? I mean, so yeah, I think he seems mature and kind of in a prime spot to get a lot out of therapy, which is why I think this series of events is so unfortunate.
Yeah, so the question, I guess, broadly is about disclosures, what information therapist shares. And this scenario, like what Jack is experiencing right now, is exactly why therapists have to be conscious of what things they disclose. We've talked about this on episodes, not so directly though. I think it comes up occasionally, but not. We haven't had I guess from an educational perspective or a teaching perspective, this is a great example. We don't know anything about the type of therapy, the presenting problem, the length of the relationship, because it actually doesn't matter. What we choose to reveal about ourselves can have unintended consequences. Things can get needlessly muddied, just like they have now.
I think that this is one where, like you said, this is a very specific example. The therapist mentions that she's a Christian. People are often worried that their therapist will judge them. I think adding in a religious element probably amplifies that idea. And I think that Jack is also very forthcoming about his assumptions about what that means, which is totally fair. We'll come back to the use of the word devout, which I think matters a lot. But, he's assuming that a Christian therapist will be judgmental about sexuality, maybe homo or bisexuality, like he says, other non-Christian things. That, he hears her say this one word and he immediately has a bunch of associations, which are fair. Like, it's not unearned from our culture, maybe what he knows about Christians, maybe what he knows from his life or popular culture or whatever. And so, as always, I'm going to the general advice is to go back and talk to her about these associations, which, may or may not hold true for this individual therapist. But I still am very curious as to why she would bring this up. And, maybe after we are done feeling for Jack and empathizing with him, we can try to come up with some ways where this might have been a reasonable move on the therapist's part. I'm not sure if we'll get there, but yeah.
Well, back to that question. So his associations, it's, are they accurate or not? Is it possible that he can have these conversations about someone who's identified? And of course it's possible, of course. And maybe having a relationship with someone whom he thinks can't actually hear him or could be in a relationship with him and not be judgmental. That could be therapeutic in and of itself.
Absolutely.
I think the problem is that it puts so much burden on Jack. Unless there had been like a lot of discussion about the disclosure itself. I mean, I think the more typical scenario is like if Jack had been pressing the therapist, like he wanted to know if she had a religious identity. I mean, I think that's the more usual route of things. And so it's hard to imagine what she was trying to accomplish by disclosing it, unless it was an accident. I mean, did it slip out? You mentioned this earlier that she did to say it was devout. I mean, I think that adjective is quite meaningful. It almost sounds like there was something that like that maybe she did want to shut down discussion. Like, was there something she didn't want to talk about, or did she get comfortable? I don't know. It's a different meaning to say, "Oh, no, I'm a Christian" versus "I'm devout Christian." And so I can really understand why he may have been reluctant to try to move forward or to act on it in the session.
Yeah, I think so, because when I'm trying to brainstorm about ways, I think that this had a lot of meaning for Jack, which is what matters. It doesn't really matter what she intended as much, at least for him. But, I think in certain cultures or certain areas of the country, everybody would say they were Christian, right? And that could mean nothing. That could just mean like, I belong here or whatever. Or it could mean you go to church all the time, or it could mean a lot of things. But devout puts an extra emphasis. I think it makes it less likely that it was an accident. And usually therapists may make a disclosure as a way of relating or normalizing. And I don't know if this was her intention, but this disclosure had a distancing effect. And I wonder about the devout part there, because even if it was that first scenario I set out, she's even distinguishing herself from other Christians.
Yeah, like even what if Jack
right?
said? Jack could have said like, "Oh, I'm," maybe he identified as even being Christian, and he's like, "Well, I'm a devout Christian." I'm like, "I'm Jewish. I'm Orthodox Jewish." Like,
right.
So we are different in this matter. And I think if you're going to do that, then I would think you could tell something in the room was off after that, and you'd want to pursue that.
Hope so.
Yeah. The same questions had he asked her, you would still pursue in maybe a recovery process. Just things like, well, does this change how you see me, or what's it like to think we might have different opinions about something? Do you think it'll make it harder to talk to me? I mean, again, those are the questions you would ask had he asked her, had he been like sort of pressing her for it. You'd want to understand the meaning behind it. But again, even if it were unintentional, I think the reaction probably would have made you want to pursue it and to see like what it meant for him.
Whether she said it on purpose or not on purpose, right? Whether it was calculated or not, those are always the follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a time, and I'm not sure if I said this on the podcast, that my daughter had to come to work with me because she was sick, like a little bit sick, too sick to go to school. And I didn't have time to cancel my first patient. And so the patient saw my daughter and I, right? And that is going to be a time when that was totally not intentional. The patient was there earlier than I thought she would be. And of course, I'm going to say, like, how did that make you feel to, see me with this kid? Or how did that? And actually, that happened another time with a different client who, was really excited that I was doing Big Brothers, Big Sisters, or maybe I had like a niece or something. Like there's, there actually is something fruitful to come out of it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm just like, whenever something comes out, you talk about it. Or, sometimes with patients, I will talk about my gender. What's it like to talk to a female therapist? What's it like to talk about this? Either they bring it up, or sometimes kind of stereotypically or more often men might say, well, I don't want to talk about sex, or I don't want to talk about my attraction to a woman because like you're also a woman and I don't want to offend you. Right. But I'm just like, there's all kinds of disclosures, but they're all a place for discussion. And so maybe that is the bottom line, is if she made this disclosure as a way to explore further, or it happened and then she went on to disclose further, then I think it's like forgivable and workable.
Yeah.
But if there's not further exploration, then I am worried that Jack will run up against a brick wall.
If there was an intention behind it other than separation, then I feel like she would have pursued it. That being said, we always say it's not what you say, it's what you say next. And, I don't know. Did they run out of time?
Maybe it was right at the end of the session.
It could have been at the end. Maybe it was, maybe she did notice it and wants to pursue it, with the next session. So yeah. I think there's plenty of opportunity for recovery here, even if it's nothing more than exploring, again, like you were saying, Jack's background around this. Like, where does he, where does some of his assumptions come from? Maybe they decide that it is an impasse that they can't overcome, or maybe, maybe something good comes from it.
Maybe. Do you think there's any difference because it's a religious disclosure? Do you think there is kind of an added or different flavor to it that way?
So some therapists actually market themselves around a portion of their identity. I don't,
right.
People aren't out there marketing like, oh, I'm a Toyota owner therapist or whatever. But like religion is one.
LGBT identity.
Yeah. Like if you belong to a group, then oftentimes that becomes a marketing thing. It's like, so it's almost like saying, we are going to have this commonality and therefore I might be able to relate to you in a way. And so I think there is, maybe that's why I think this does feel different. Do you have an idea?
I guess I think that it may be more weighty because it's religious. Again, I think judgment often comes into that. There is usually a moral aspect to religions, let's say. And, maybe if it's the dominant religion in an area like Christianity, and let's say Jack's or the client or the patient is not that religion, I think sometimes there's a hierarchy. There's a lot of oppression built into religion. Maybe this is about my feelings about religion. I don't know. I think there's a lot there. I wonder about it. I mean, I guess with anything, I think that even with the marketing, like you mentioned, I think that the therapists and the patients, but the therapists for sure, need to be careful to not assume what that means, right? There's a lot of different ways to be Christian. There's a lot of different ways to be any religion, which is maybe why she's talking about the devoutness. But I think you don't want to just think like, okay, we're on the same page and now we don't have to talk about it. On one hand, I'm like, well, then if the therapist thinks they can't treat someone who's not a Christian, maybe writing Christian psychotherapist on their card is a good way to weed those folks out. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. The other thing I think about religion, or at least that came up in this question, is I kind of thought, well, lady, you did not need to disclose that, right? There's other ways, even if you wanted to hint to him that you know about what he's talking about, if he's talking about a religious thing or otherwise, you don't have to put that into words. I know that folks can't always hide their identity, and I don't think that they are required to. But there are some religions that require, I don't know, a headscarf, for example, right? Or different clothing or grooming or whatever things that are going to give someone away in that way. And those folks maybe can't hide their religion. And I don't know if that makes it different. Maybe these are just like bigger questions. But I guess my general idea is, whether it's about religion or not, inserting something in the room that didn't have to be there just kind of feels like extra noise that is about the therapist and not about Jack.
Yeah, I tried to say this earlier, and so I appreciate you saying it again, because I don't know why the waters are already hard enough to see into. So why do you muddy them when you don't need to?
I agree.
All right. So what should Jack go back? Or he's got to go back, but I mean,
he's got to go back, and he doesn't want to start over, and he liked her.
Yeah.
But I think he just has to be, as transparent as he can be about how this affected him. And I think very specifically his fear of being judged. And then I don't know if there's a right answer, but I think then just be really open to hearing what she has to say. And then, maybe if it seems good enough to keep going, give it a couple more sessions to see if the fear of judgment can calm back down. But if it's not, she may have done irreparable damage.
Yeah. That sounds good. Good luck, Jack. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah, please do. And shout out to all our teenage listeners out there. I didn't know we had them. It's awesome. I'm excited. No, I'm all about it.
I mean, he's got to be. Yeah. He's got to be the only one.
Well, like you said, he's actually extremely mature and
That's true.
Emotionally intelligent. So, of course.
Yeah. I mean, we are old.
Don't get me started.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. And a special thanks to Alice and Jack for the questions. As always, we love getting your feedback in the form of emails or reviews. You can send us an email or leave an audio message at our website, callthepsychiatrist.com. You can also email us directly at callthepsychiatrist@gmail.com. The DMs are open on Instagram and Facebook at Call the Psychiatrist, and I'm on Threads now. There are no DMs there yet, but we can chat in the comments. And most importantly, tell somebody about this show so we can grow the audience. Take care.
That's right. Bye.